There are things that carry a person through the places where they cannot carry themselves. Not always visible from the outside. Not always nameable, even from the inside. But real. The way the ground under your feet is real, even when you're not thinking about it. Sammy Davis Jr. faced obstacles over the course of his life that most people, hearing them listed, find difficult to fully take in. He was black in an America that made its hatred of that visible everywhere, in laws and in customs and in rooms that would not let him through the door. He lost an eye in a car accident at the height of his early fame, and returned to performing sooner than anyone thought possible. He was a convert to Judaism in an era when that carried its own stigma, in addition to everything else. He navigated the entertainment industry of the mid-20th century, which was not gentle to people who didn't fit its preferred categories, and he fit multiple of them at once. What people who knew him well often described was someone who, underneath all the energy and the talent and the almost superhuman drive to succeed, carried something private. Something that didn't always make it into the interviews or the performances or the public story of Sammy Davis Jr. A belief, quiet, persistent, occasionally shaken but never fully broken, that his life had meaning, that the obstacles were not proof of his worthlessness, that something larger than himself and larger than the particular cruelty of the moment had not abandoned him. He spoke about this most directly in the context of his conversion to Judaism, a decision that surprised many people, and that he was asked about with varying degrees of hostility for the rest of his life. What he said about it, in various ways, across many years, was this: that he had found in that tradition something he had been missing for a long time, a framework for making sense of suffering that didn't require him to pretend the suffering wasn't real. A community that understood, from its own long history, that hardship and meaning could exist in the same place. That you could acknowledge how hard something was and still believe there was a reason to keep going. That combination, the honest acknowledgement of difficulty alongside an equally honest belief in meaning, is actually quite rare. Most people, when confronted with hardship, do one of two things. They minimize it. They tell themselves it wasn't so bad, or that others have had it worse, or that they should be grateful and stop complaining. Or they let it overwhelm the meaning. They conclude that because things are hard, or have been hard, there must not be any point. Sammy Davis Jr. seemed, in his best moments, to do neither. He named the hardship clearly. He didn't pretend it wasn't there. He didn't perform gratitude over the top of genuine pain. And at the same time, he kept going, kept working, kept building, kept reaching towards something, with a consistency that suggested he believed, somewhere underneath all of it, that the reaching mattered. That was the faith. Not a certainty, not an easy answer, not something that removed the difficulty or explained it away. Just a quiet, persistent belief that the going on was worth it, that the meaning was there, even when it couldn't be clearly seen. Maybe you felt that too. Maybe there have been seasons in your life when the hardship was real and the meaning was hard to find. When things happened that you couldn't explain or justify or make sense of, losses or failures, or simply long stretches of time when nothing seemed to be working, and the question, "What is any of this for?" had no obvious answer. And maybe, during some of those seasons, you held on to something. A belief, a practice, a community, a private sense that, however unclear it was, something larger than your immediate circumstances was still present. That the difficulty wasn't the whole story. That there was something worth continuing toward, even when it wasn't visible yet. Here's something gentle to consider. That belief, whatever form it takes for you, whether it lives inside a specific tradition or simply in a general sense that your life has meaning, is not nothing. It is, in fact, one of the most powerful things a person can carry, more durable, often, than talent or intelligence or resources, because it's the thing that determines whether you keep going when the other resources are depleted. Faith, in its most useful form, is not a feeling of certainty. It's closer to a decision made quietly to continue acting as if meaning exists, even on the days when you can't see it. To keep showing up. To keep working. To keep reaching toward the people and the things that matter to you, even when reaching is hard and the outcome is uncertain. Sammy Davis Jr. was not a person of constant serenity. He was emotional, exuberant, sometimes volatile, deeply sensitive. The faith he carried wasn't a wall that kept the difficulty out. It was more like a floor, something underneath everything else that didn't move, even when everything above it was in chaos. He could be in pain, and the floor held. He could be uncertain, and the floor held. He could fail, publicly, dramatically, and the floor held. Maybe there's a version of that floor in your own life, something that is held quietly through the seasons when everything above it felt unstable. A relationship. A practice. A belief about yourself or about the world that even when tested hasn't fully given way. If so, maybe it's worth acknowledging. Not with grand ceremony, just quietly to yourself or to someone you trust. There is something that has held me through the difficult times. I don't always know what to call it, but it's been there, and I'm grateful for it. And if you're in one of those difficult seasons right now, if the meaning is hard to find and the floor feels less certain than usual, maybe it's worth looking for whatever version of that floor exists for you, even a small one. A practice that centers you. A community that holds you accountable to something larger than your immediate circumstances. A person who believes in the meaning of your life, even when you can't fully see it yourself. These things don't resolve the hardship. They don't explain it. They just make it possible to keep going, which, in the long run, is often enough. Sammy Davis Jr. kept going through conditions that might have stopped someone with less underneath them. He kept performing, kept reaching, kept building, kept loving, even when all of it was being made harder by forces he hadn't chosen and couldn't fully control. The belief that kept him going wasn't always visible from the outside, but it was there. A quiet floor, holding. If you're watching this tonight, maybe yours is holding too, even if you can't quite see it from where you are right now. There's one more thing worth sitting with here, something that comes from the other direction. Maybe faith, in whatever form it has taken in your life, has felt fragile lately. Maybe things have happened, losses, disappointments, prayers that seemed to go unanswered, that have made the floor feel less certain than it once did. Maybe you're not sure anymore what you believe, or whether believing in anything is still something you have access to. If that's where you are, here's something Sammy Davis Jr.'s story might offer you. His faith wasn't always steady. By his own account, there were seasons when the difficulty of his life strained it, when the gap between what he believed and what he was experiencing felt too wide to hold together. He didn't pretend those seasons didn't happen. He talked about them with an honesty that was rare for a man of his era and his public persona. And what he described in those conversations was not a faith that survived by becoming invulnerable. It survived by being honest about its own fragility, by acknowledging the doubt out loud, to God, to a rabbi, to a trusted friend, rather than suppressing it. By saying, in effect, "I am not sure I understand this, but I am not ready to let go either." That might be the most honest form of faith available to most human beings. Not certainty, not the absence of doubt, just the refusal to fully let go, the persistent, sometimes stubborn insistence on staying in relationship with the question, even when the question is difficult and the answer is unclear. There's a particular kind of courage in that refusal, not the courage of the true believer who never doubts, but the quieter courage of the person who doubts and continues anyway, who shows up in whatever form their practice takes, even on the days when showing up feels more like stubbornness than devotion. That showing up matters. It is, in some traditions, considered the very definition of faith. Not the feeling, the action. Showing up again and again in the direction of what you believe, even when you can't feel it as clearly as you once did. If that's where you are, somewhere in the middle of a season of doubt, still moving, not quite sure what you're moving toward, maybe that's enough. Maybe the moving itself is the faith. And maybe, in time, the floor becomes perceptible again beneath it. Sammy Davis Jr. spent his entire career moving toward audiences, toward excellence, toward something larger than himself that he didn't always have words for. Through the hardest stretches, the moving didn't stop. And looking back, the moving itself was inseparable from the faith. It was the faith made visible, one small act at a time. If you're watching this tonight, and the floor feels less certain than usual, maybe there's still something small you can do in the direction of what you believe. One small act, one quiet showing up. Not because you've resolved the doubt, just because you're not ready to let go. So take a slow breath, and maybe, tonight, take a moment to acknowledge whatever it is that has been holding you quietly through everything. It deserves to be named, and you deserve to know it's there.